I fucking called it. I wanted to make a video on why I like all of the various live action adaptations of Spider-Man before the No Way Home movie, but unfortunately I couldn't find the time. After watching No Way Home, I just began to appreciate Spider-Man even more. No Way Home is a celebration of Spider-Man media, which I believe was handled beautifully. But let me use this opportunity to take you through my Spider-Man journey, and maybe you will get to understand why I love the character so much. I was a kid when I first got into Spider-Man. He was my first favorite superhero, and as you'd know, I'm a dog, so yeah. I really wanted to be Spider-Man. I wanted to climb on walls, swing through the city. I wanted to do all the amazing things he did. I'm a 90s kid, and my first introduction to Spider-Man was through the Tobey Maguire movies directed by Sam Raimi. The first movie blew me away and I watched it over and over again. Heck, I could even remember some of the scenes word for word. And then I watched the second movie, which reinforced my love for the character even more. These movies defined who Spider-Man was for most people, even though they weren't entirely comic accurate. And unless you're a die-hard fan of Stan Lee and Steve Ditko's run, you would believe that these stories were lore, but they didn't have to be. Sam Raimi wanted to tell a story and he had a clear vision for it. He even wanted Tobey Maguire when the studio wasn't sold on him entirely, and when he got it, he told a magnificent story. Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man is a product of its time. He was the awkward nerd who couldn't talk to girls, and as I was going through that awkward phase, I kinda got it. His movies defined what Spider-Man meant to me in a long time before I even began to read the comics seriously. The words spoken by Rosemary Harris Aunt May about heroes shaped my mind growing up.
Everybody loves a hero. People line up for them, cheer them, scream their names, and years later they'll tell how they stood in the rain for hours just to get a glimpse of the one who taught him to hold on a second longer. I believe there's a hero in all of us that keeps us honest, gives us strength, makes us noble, and finally allows us to die with pride, even though sometimes we have to be steady and give up the thing we want the most, even our dreams.
I always wanted to be a hero. I always fantasized at the thought of it as a kid. One of my first and favorite Disney animation was Hercules, which taught me that a hero is not defined by the size of his strength, but by the strength of his heart. And that's what the Raimi movies had. They had hearts. They were the light-hearted, campy superhero movies of its era and tried to make more of a Richard Donner Superman vibe rather than a darker and gritty vibe to it. And it worked. It worked for their movies, and it worked for the story they're trying to tell, and it worked for the events that happened at the time too. They weren't perfect movies, but as a kid with not much thought for critical thinking, they were perfect to me. Ending the first two movies with a swing through the city as Danny Elfman's iconic theme plays. In Spider-Man 3, Peter was finally with the love of his life, Mary Jane. He wanted to marry her, but Peter was told by Aunt May that a husband is supposed to be able to put his wife before him, but he couldn't before. He wasn't ready. He was caught up in all the love Spider-Man was getting, and he pushed her away when she needed him emotionally, when they needed each other. Maybe rather than an uplifting swing through the city this time, the boy finally becomes a man and takes responsibility of his life. Due to their popularity, the bar was set unreasonably high for the next Spider-Man.
I think this might be the most incredible day of my life, and I've always wanted to be at Comic-Con in Hall H as Spider-Man with all of you guys. Has always been a dream of mine. So thanks for having me. And
I love Andrew Garfield. I love his Spider-Man. Coming off of Tobey's Spider-Man, it was a little hard getting used to the idea that another guy was playing the role. With Mark Webb at the helm, he brought us the Amazing Spider-Man, and who, for comic purists, was a more accurate Spider-Man. Andrew's movies were different, tonally and all, gone are the campy vibes of the Raimi movies and a more realistic Spider-Man. Andrew plays the role filled with heart and love for the material. After completing his run of the movies, his Spider-Man lost more than any of the Spider-Men. He lost his parents, Uncle Ben, which could have been avoided if only he acted responsibly. He watched Captain Stacy die as he made a promise to stay away from Gwen, even though he loved her. And when he broke that promise, it haunted him. And then the worst happened. Because he broke his promise, she's dead. If only he stayed away, if only he kept his promise, he lost her too. He's only human, and being asked to stay away from the one you love is heartbreaking. He did the responsible thing by staying away from her, but he is not perfect. So in doing so, he has to live with the consequences, live with the guilt and regret. Mark Webb's Amazing Spider-Man movies encapsulate what it means to be human, being able to live with your mistakes, being able to move on. In the first movie, it followed Peter as an angsty teenager in search of a father figure, someone who he could look up to, which he found in Kurt Connors due to his relationship to his dad, but in doing so, he did not see what he already had in Uncle Ben. The Amazing Spider-Man is my favorite Spider-Man origin story. It does not rush through it like the others, and I know people are tired of seeing Uncle Ben die, but that's what defines the character. He's defined by the overwhelming responsibility he places on himself to do the right thing due to his inability to do the right thing before. Because if you have the power to do the right thing, you have the moral obligation to do those things, because that's what's at stake here, not choice.
Responsibility.
The scene where Peter argues with Uncle Ben gets me every time. Top-notch acting from Andrew Garfield and Michael Sheen. Uncle Ben acknowledges that he's not the smartest guy around, but he still wanted to teach him to be responsible. But Peter was caught up in a dream, working with someone who was close to his dad, and maybe seeing his dad in him, he began to lose focus on what was important. He ran away and hid under a bridge, while Uncle Ben went out to look for him. After letting Amaga go because he could not pay for his milk, Uncle Ben got shot. He made so many mistakes that day. He was all up in his head, and Uncle Ben's death just sealed the deal. He was devastated. These movies came at a time when I was experiencing some growing pains in my life, and watching how Andrew overcomes his grief and moves on also inspired me. It was heartbreaking to see him finally listen to Uncle Ben's voicemail after all is said and done, and finally finds out what it truly means to be a hero, to be Spider-Man. We are all human. We love, we hurt, we grieve, we rage, we are passionate, and we make mistakes, but when we fall, we get up again. These movies, whether you love them or not, take the Spider-Man mythos and modernize the characters in a realistic way, and Andrew's interpretation of Spider-Man could be the best yet. Sorry, Toby. He was charismatic, he was funny, and damn, was he amazing. The saddest thing to see was Andrew not reprising his role in the MCU due to certain issues behind the scenes, and how heartbreaking it was to see he couldn't serve as the character in the story he was trying to tell.
I signed up to serve the story and to serve this incredible character that I've been dressing as since I was 3.
But we have a new face now, and I thought it would be much harder for me to accept this new guy Spider-Man, but I was much older, I had read more comics, and was a bit more versed in Spider-Man lore. And even though Tom Holland's Spider-Man kinda deviated from the usual Spider-Man that we knew, I think I kinda knew what they were going for.
No one has actually told me why I'm in Berlin, or what I'm doing. This is insane. It's the most amazing thing that's ever happened. So Mrs. Rogue was like, hey, Underoos! And I just sort of flipped in. Greatest day of my life. And I stole Cap's shield, and I was like, hey, what's up, everybody? And then...
You're the Spider-Man.
Tom Holland's Spider-Man was introduced to us in Captain America Civil War.
Underoos!
And knowing how the comics goes, Andrew's Spider-Man would have fitted the narrative perfectly. But due to the rights and ownership of the Spider-Man franchise from Sony and Marvel, we got a new Spider-Man. I was not a big fan of Homecoming, even though I do have certain favorite scenes. But I don't know, people akin the Home series to Stan Lee and Steve Ditko's run in the early comic Spider-Man run due to its tone and narrative characteristics. But not everyone is willing to go back and read those books. Hence, Tom's Spider-Man became the Spider-Man without any consequence. His story was a much different interpretation of the others that came before, with the absence of characters like Uncle Ben. How is he going to learn responsibility? The inclusion of Iron Man to take the parental or father figure role did not really sit right with most people in the long run. People felt like Peter had everything handed to him and didn't really struggle with anything. And the inclusion of Iron Man's tech didn't help either. His actual first suit was made by Iron Man, which was always weird for me, but I moved past it like everything else. Fresh off the Ultimate Spider-Man comics and the animated show, I actually saw some similarities. The Ultimate Spider-Man focuses on a rather young Peter Parker, still in high school and earning his stripes as Spider-Man, whereas the animated show also follows another high school Peter Parker, whom is recruited by Nick Fury to join S.H.I.E.L.D. in order to do better, in order to be the Ultimate Spider-Man. Not that these themes worked for everyone, but I appreciate the similarities. It was also cool to see Peter kind of not have to shoulder everything for a change. He can be a kid, hang out with his friends, go on a date, stay grounded, be a friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. But we all know that the time in the sun does not last forever. Every boy would have to grow up. Not to say he was absolved entirely from responsibility and consequence. They were there, but they didn't seem to hold much weight. But that will not entirely be true either. He was entrusted with Edith, which was a present to him by Tony Stark. He didn't want to bear that responsibility at the moment, so he leaves it with Beck so that he can finally go on a date with his crush, which in the end came to bite him in the back. And that was just the tip of the iceberg. That decision alone, coupled with a few more, caused a domino effect of bad things happening, which played out through to the next movie. No Way Home is my favorite Spider-Man movie. The movie is not perfect, it has its flaws, and it definitely could have used a bit more time in delving. But for what it did right, it made me love the movie. The movie is about Peter dealing with the aftermath of Mysterio. His identity has been revealed to the whole world, which is affecting him and all his loved ones. So he wants everyone to forget that he's Spider-Man. But it's not that simple, is it? His indecisiveness ruined Doctor Strange's spell, which caused enemies from multiple dimensions to pour into his universe. So he decides to send them back to their universe to help Doctor Strange fix the stability of space and time. But some of these people die when they go back to their universe, and he couldn't live with himself knowing that he's sending these people back to their deaths. So he decides to help them, but it doesn't go according to plan. Norman Osborn, or the Green Goblin, is Spider-Man's greatest foe. So amongst the motley crew of evil villains, he was the one you would suspect the most due to his bipolar nature. And then the worst happened. He tried to help these people whom he owed nothing to, but in return they ruined his life. Peter wanted to send them home at first, but Aunt May wanted him to help them because he has been given a gift, and with that he has a responsibility to do what's right. The theme of responsibility is prevalent in this movie in particular, and it ripples through and through most scenes. He wanted to do the right thing, but in the end it came back to bite him in the ass. He regretted even trying to help them in the first place, but before she finally passed, she told him he did the right thing and he shouldn't regret it. The introduction of the previous Spider-Man was a spectacle to behold. It could have been used for fan service, but they did a really good job here. They came at a moment where Tom Holland's Peter was at his lowest point. He was sad, he was angry, he wanted revenge. He has had enough of trying to help, of trying to be the bigger man. But there's a lesson here. They all lost someone really dear to them, which made them angry, resentful, bitter, and even vengeful. But unlike them, he's not alone this time. He has his best friend Ned, he has MJ. He can still do the right thing by leaning on his newfound brothers. Introducing beloved characters like these needed to be treated with care, because if not done well, will steal the spotlight from Tom Holland's Spider-Man and the story they're trying to tell. But they were able to integrate these characters into the narrative successfully, with just bits and pieces of information concerning their universe. And if it was brought up, it was in service of the story. Tom's Spider-Man grew a lot in this movie, and in the end, when all was said and done, he was alone. He could have had it all by trying to make his loved ones remember him, but that would be selfish of him, because knowing his identity as Spider-Man would put them in danger all over again. He ruined their lives once, but he could make it right this time. His sins are not theirs to bear, because the problem was him trying to live two different lives, and the longer he does it, the more dangerous it becomes for those closest to him. He made his choice, a life filled with responsibility, and now he is burdened to carry it alone. The boy is now a man, befitting the title of Spider-Man. I honestly get annoyed when I see this. No Way Home is the third installment of the Home series, and by introducing characters from other Spider-Man media would likely take away the attention from Tom's Spider-Man, but I didn't. They were able to beautifully develop Tom emotionally, which even gives the previous movies even more value, and the introduction of Tobey and Andrew didn't take away from the narrative. They served the purpose to help Tom understand what he stands for with the iconic line,
"With great power comes great responsibility,"
while also beautifully completing the character arcs of the previous Spider-Man. Andrew gets to save Mary Jane due to his inability to save Gwen. Tobey meets Otto and tells him he's still trying to do better. Watching these scenes brought tears to my eyes because I love all the iterations of Spider-Man, and they didn't change the characters for the movie. They were still the same characters who just came back to help another who was lost, and I love it. There's no best Spider-Man or comic accurate Spider-Man because every version of Spider-Man fits in the movie they are in, the time it was produced, and the stories they all try to tell us in their own unique way. Heck, even the comics go through different writers and artists from the main 616 universe and beyond. Each writer tries to do things differently and tell their own stories differently, not forsaking the characterizations of said characters. So I believe you have the right to have a version of Spider-Man you favor more than the other, which is okay and perfectly valid. Every iteration of Spider-Man brings something to the table which the others don't, which make them all unique in their own way, because anyone can wear the mask. I know you're wondering why I got so emotional when writing the script or talk about the subject, but Spider-Man means so much to me, and as a kid growing up watching and loving each adaptation as they came along, I can't help but get emotional. This is a young boy's dream which came to fruition, and the studio probably thought it was a good idea, that's why they did it. With the actors having reservations about coming back to play their characters once more, I'm thankful they did. I spoke to my friend Hansen how it would be cool to see all three Spider-Man in one movie. At the time, it was impossible due to all the licensing and contracts and all that, but having it happen, even though it was just wishful thinking at the time, seeing it happen now just brought another level of joy to my heart which I couldn't explain. I didn't have a particularly good year last year, and even it took me a bit longer to feel the Christmas spirits. I was so guarded and threw away all hope for something good to happen, and I know it's just a movie which probably won't change my life, but for what it stands for, it gave me hope. Hope that everything might not be alright, but if I could just hold steady and maybe push through, maybe, just maybe, something good will happen. I'm so thankful to Marvel Studios, Kevin Feige, Amy Pascal, Tom Holland, Andrew Garfield, Tobey Maguire, Steve Ditko, and finally Stan Lee, who unfortunately could not be part of this masterpiece. Who knew a single movie could spark a dying flame in a young boy's heart that's been dimmed by the harsh realities of this world?
You know, I guess one person can make a difference. Enough said.
Thank you very much for watching. Be sure to like the video if you enjoyed it. Let me know who your favorite iteration of Spider-Man is down in the comments. Subscribe to my channel and turn on post notifications to be alerted whenever I post a video. And remember to keep moving forward. One of my favorite scenes in the movie was when May died and she told him with great power comes great responsibility, and when he was staying with her till her final moments, J. Jonah Jameson had called the police to come and arrest Spider-Man, and he was crying for help. He was crying for help. Please help us. But instead of help, they rather shot him and he had to run away, leaving her body just lying there. And there was this scene where like you see a glimpse of her crying because they were chasing him down and he had no one to help. Like it was a really sad scene, and it kind of made me feel like that was his moment of being Spider-Man, feeling that Spider-Man pain. It really got to me at that moment, and like I think that moment actually defined him in that movie. It was one of my favorite scenes.